Okay, I'll kick off the questions, and then feel free, anybody in the audience can ask at any time. So first question is, how do we find interesting applications for our customers? Perhaps, Conor, you've got the most experience of talking to the different regions across PAX.
Yeah, actually, I think the presentation from Panos, the questions that customers are asking when you do talk to them about Android devices at first, I could relate to a lot of the comments that Panos was making. So I had some experience with this, and it's true that customers, when they see that you're selling Android devices, they do assume that you're coming to the table already with a library or a catalog of applications that you have available that you can present to them, okay? And it is true, in most of the cases, we don't have those applications available out of the box. However, what I have seen in certain markets is that you tend to have companies who are specialized in developing Android applications for retail applications, usually ePOS type applications that they are selling on tablets and selling on smartphones. And sometimes they already have solutions for payment using, say, an mPOS device, which is communicating with the tablet by Bluetooth and so on. And those companies are a real target to partner with to port their applications onto the Android devices. And if you just do some research in your market, you will find that those companies are already there. They're already developing these kind of applications, and they would be very enthusiastic about working with you as a terminal vendor to put their applications onto your device. And usually, because those applications are already working on Android, it isn't a huge work for them to transfer their applications onto the Android payment terminals. So they're one source. But Panos was saying that the target customers are usually acquiring banks for us. But with Android devices, your available market gets much more extensive. There's lots of vertical sectors where people are selling PDA type devices today, not necessarily with payment, but sometimes with payment as well. And those vertical sectors in vending or in transport, ticketing and so on, they all become target customers as well. And they have those Android applications for each of their specific verticals as well, right? So you just need to have people who are doing a little bit more market research, looking at all the different verticals, and you have to kind of figure out whether the Android devices can be sold into those different verticals as well. And one thing that's interesting I've seen is that the pricing for those kind of solutions is often much higher than a payment terminal, a traditional payment terminal. And you can almost pitch your device as a ticketing machine that does payment, which is worth a lot more than a payment terminal that does ticketing, okay? Because ticketing machines are sold usually at something like €1,000 per device, right? And a payment terminal is only 200. So you have to work with these companies that have the applications, find out the ones that are most interesting, and then target the vertical segments in your market according to the application. Okay? That's my experience.
We have a similar experience. So first of all, we see you also said apps really for our areas are still missing, I would say. But already when you sell an Android terminal, which is an open platform, everybody in the banking industry understands that he has, with this type of product, a complete different offering model. So even if he has not now already the fitting app for it, that he can add a lot of different apps, for example, from partners like say tax-free partners or rate payment, for example, etc. This opportunity to know I have an open platform gives already a push to the market. This is what we recognize. And the second thing is really what you also said, that you have a lot of vertical businesses which have today their tablet connected via maybe Bluetooth, Wi-Fi to a payment device. And often these tablets are already with real business applications on Android. When you show them this product line, they understand immediately I don't have to change my business application, which is a lot of investment in, but they really can use it immediately, bring it on the payment device, and they have then all-in-one integrated. For example, a lot of delivery services, logistic services, etc., or even food delivery to homes. They often have an app where they control their drivers, etc., where you also have scanning goods, and all these combinations are really integrated already in these professional business apps. And in the last centuries, you always had to combine it with an external device. Now you really can. You don't need to port the application, you simply use it and put it on the Android device. So I think only this platform is really opening a lot of new business opportunities. Also, if you have maybe not the app already today.
Yeah, I mean, the classic example for me would be the E-Series, because there are so many retailers who already have a cash register system, an ECR system, which in many cases is already Android-based, and they have the Ingenicos and Verifone and traditional terminals interface into the ECR. So now you go and say you put all of that in a box, and you don't have to change your side of the story. You just add the payment in a nice box. Then as long as the financials are not too much different, that's a great channel. There are many other opportunities out there. Greg mentioned yesterday the need for a ruggedized terminal. That was a very good point, because I recently have a partner, a reseller, who is selling some solutions for cities with a lot of tourists. They all have these hundreds of people on the street selling tickets for bus rides or other attractions with a portable, huge brick-like device that they're using for that, which is way too much more expensive than an Android terminal. I mean, he would be happy to use the A920, A930 to replace them, but the problem is that they have to be drop resistant, et cetera, et cetera. That's just an example of how now PAX has the fundamentals in place. I expect more and more products to come out, which will help us address these very specific verticals. Now, this also is adding a complexity, however. I mean, we have to be straight about that, because selling terminals to the banks, okay, I buy from Mark, I sell to the bank, end of story. Selling Android terminals and then facilitating through Paxtor the sale of applications is putting too many layers on this. And there is a complexity in managing that. I mean, now, think about that. A developer has to develop an application, Pax has to approve it and vet it. We put it on Paxtor that we have sold to the customer. The application is sold to a merchant. So think how many layers are in there. Each of them is expected to do something to make the cycle work. So each of them is expected to make some money out of that. I mean, I said earlier, just the payment and settlement of all of that. For a restaurant owner to buy an application from Paxtor for his Android terminal that he bought from his bank, it's 5 layers. 5 people who want to make money out of that. So it's not so easy, it's not so straightforward. I don't want to be the bad guy saying everything is difficult and complicated. But because I have seen it happening, you have to be ready for the complexities. It's not as straightforward. Everybody sees what has to be done. Let's see how we can do it, yeah? Lots of things to do there. Final word on the applications. Sometimes we all get carried away by marketing and talk about thousands of applications. Do an experiment. Go on Google Play, see the categories of applications that are already there, there are billions, yeah? And try to figure out which of these applications, of the entire application set on Google Play, could make sense for a merchant on a payment terminal. The application categories we're talking about are not that many. Some people say it might be 30, 40 categories. Some people say it might be up to 100 categories. I think this is all too optimistic, but let's say it's not like there is 1 million applications out there that the merchant could download on his payment professional device at his store. The scope, the categories of application are way less than that. Yeah? So this is another thing to keep in mind.
Panos, just sticking on ECR, maybe Shadowmaker from Monslip. So you guys are very busy with ECR software. Who's it for and what verticals on Android?
I just want to go back to that question. You said, how do we find interesting apps, right? That was the question. And for me, the number one thing is that communication between all the parties involved in this system, because there are things going on in the US, there are things going on in South America and Europe and different places, and no one is communicating about what we're doing. I think the number one thing is that we need to open up and communicate and say this challenge that I have in Scandinavia, have someone else encountered this challenge before? Do you have a solution for this? And start sharing information and give tips on what kind of apps that there could be for the ECRs or for the E-Series or the A-Series.
And what's your experience, Charles Mack, on the ECR side? On the who's it for? What type of verticals?
I think
And is the screen size? What's your experience in terms of when they actually go to deploy those type of apps, ECR apps especially?
I think the number one thing that you have to think about is that, I mean, the hardware is a beautiful thing, and it could actually work for different type of verticals. So you need to think about who is your end customer, because it's going to be different layers. So you could probably have, you know, high-end customers. You could have, you know, entry-level customers or something in between. Are they restaurants, retail, health and beauty? And there are different solutions for all these segments. So you need to think about which segment and who your customers are and find the suitable solution for that.
Do you know in Malaysia? Maybe you can share some experiences.
Yeah, I think I like to start from the technology's point of view. Basically, we go back to very fundamentals, actually, that previously with the button-based terminal, that basically this is driven by how the terminals would want the merchants to do. Whether you want to do sales, you have to press this button or that button, or maybe with some multiple buttons together. It makes the merchants very, very, very much attached to, if you know this terminal, you only know how does it work. But today, let us share from the user experience perspective. From the today's, if anything that is just like Steve Jobs just now said, it's not about the design of the product. It's all about the design, how it works. With this UX environment, especially with the packs, we come from the A920. It gave a lot of different flavor to the merchants, that how the merchants actually they want to use it, because the moment that one they see it, they know how to use it. Fantastic. This is something that they want to do it. This is called user experience. It's not about the graphic, how nice is it. It's how simple that can make the merchants easily understand and activate right away. That is one of part of the user experience we emphasize the most important. The second part of it, you have to care about the operation costs, because the moment that if every single merchant they find it very difficult to use, they will call back. They will give feedbacks, they will do a lot of things that will cost the operations unlimited way. I mean, there's forever to solve the same problem until it is redesigned again or resolved. So come back to that. Our very first priority is about user experience. And second, we also care about the operation costs. Then after that, we come into the technologies, the developer. Only we put the last to the priority to the developer, because the developer could do any magics on making sure the user experience and the operation costs. Well, the last part is the simplicity of the coding. So with this kind of strategy that you need to plan very, very well, especially nowadays, lots of people are talking about DevOps, and we saw a wonderful Cyber Labs doing that DevOps on the terminal. That is very, very wonderful, that I would like to encourage every one of you here that actually look into that part of DevOps. The meaning of DevOps is actually about speed of penetrations. Based on many years ago, if we really want to deploy a terminal, we need maybe 4 or 5 people, like the developers, the designer, the QC, quality control, and some of the product managers to work it together. But with DevOps, you can basically using only very minimal of people to work from the head to the toe. And these people, they have the visions of foreseeing from the very beginning how it developed, how the operation will reduce, and then during at the end, that how it can dynamically change. From that, with Androids, with this I would like to say about Android is open platform. There is a lot of brilliant ideas or sharing among the communities that we could actually pick up from there. This is the part of the sharing communities that we have in PAX. We also like to share a lot of the problems that we face, the challenges that we working out with together with you. We like to share with you even after the forums together. So this is basically concludes my points of technologies can actually with PAX, with the Android smart terminal today could actually do not only payments, multi applications and beyond the payments.
I have a question. We see a lot of vertical segment applications use Google services. How does, having them on a payment application, Android terminal, how does that work? Because we see that using Google services, we may have to get Google GMS certification, otherwise it cannot work.
Someone pretend to be the expert there.
So I think what we will do in our markets is we will set up the PAX store also in Europe, and it's clear that not all these Google apps are downloaded on a payment Android terminal because at the end you are responsible also for the security. If something happens with this device, that there is a fraud because of a third-party app, then immediately you will have destroyed your image. So I think this is the biggest fear, what also Panos said. So it's, the terminal is not connected to the Google Play Store. The terminal is connected to our private, you can say, PAX store or CCV store, for example, hosted in Germany. And we will, for all third-party apps, also set up on our side a certification process. Not a certification process which is checking the functionality of the app, for example, of administration app for all your employees or things like that. So not the functionality in focus, but the security in focus. That there is not an app put on the device which is, for example, asking for entering your MacStripe data with your CVC code, or for entering your PIN and grabbing it and sending it out. So this is the security verification you do, and only an app which is then certified and is signed also by us or by you then can be really put to the App Store. And as the device is anyway always online, you also can block that if there is maybe something happening what you have not encountered, you can immediately switch also off this app. So you need to be clear to your customers that it's an Android device, but not connected to, you can say, to the Google App Store, where everything can be on, and where, like Panos said, it's right, 100,000 of developers with good ideas, and ideas in good and negative directions. No, you have it fully under control. This is important to give this also message to your customers. And even it's not possible that a customer in, for example, another country can put an app on your device. So you have your own signing keys. So it's really a very secure system and PCI conform. You always should state this. So there is no difference.
I mean, I'm the last person to talk about the technical side of this question, but this whole discussion is mostly, I think we should address it in a business way. And this is where the fact that PAX was the first in the market with Android, and that we're getting market share now to the point where very soon, when you talk Android terminals, it would mean PAX terminals, apart from very small exceptions. Instead of opening up our terminal fleet or our environment to as many applications as possible, which I think is a bad practice, which is what all the other small manufacturers are doing. They say, yeah, I have terminals. Yeah, can I connect to Google Play? Yeah, whatever. Yeah, you can connect to Apple Store, whatever you want. So we should take the exact opposite way on a business sense, yeah? That our environment with PAX Store and everything else, and with the security lab and everything, is very secure. It's very difficult to get in. The applications are very carefully tested, they are vetted. We take responsibility for all fraud, for anything that would happen, even if it means that instead of 1 million applications, you will have 100 applications available. So I think this fact that in many cases with the customer, it looks like a disadvantage. Panos, you don't allow me to connect to Google Play, but the landing guys were here and they said I can connect wherever I want. We have to turn it business-wise into an advantage based on security and based on the size of packs and the fact that we are first to market.
And I also think that you have to carefully think about what kind of apps you put in your pack store. You have to carefully evaluate and find out what kind of apps actually add value to your customers. And I think, as Panos said, that's an advantage. You cannot put anything in there. You have to be very careful on what type of solution that you put in the store.
Yeah, and there is an important point when Panos was saying earlier on that there are millions of Android developers, but very few who know about payment, okay? And there are millions of Android developers and even fewer who know about PCI regulations, okay? And when you're talking to customers who are saying like Google mobile services and so on, you also need to educate those customers that there are security requirements specific to payment devices where you're entering a PIN on the same screen that's being used for everything else. And it's the PCI regulations which put limitations on certain functionality, okay? So that is one of the key differences between a smartphone and an Android payment device. You don't have PCI certification on a smartphone. Well, not yet. There's new standards coming out about that. But you do have PCI PTS software requirements on Android or any other type of payment device, and that imposes restrictions on what kind of services that you can put on a device. And being able to connect a payment terminal to an open system where any type of software or any type of functionality could be put on the device and you're not controlling that, that is definitely against PCI requirements. And anybody who did that would put themselves in a difficult position if anything happened on the device. You could almost have PCI forcing that device to be taken off the market if there was any kind of scandal associated with that. So that's why there are limitations in certain things. And that's something you just need to educate developers and customers about. That is a main difference between obviously a payment terminal and a tablet or a smartphone.
There was mention about, it was a sales point that we can use, have a vertical segment, use their own current applications on our terminal, and that was one of the selling points that you mentioned before, which was the reason why I asked the question, because most of the Android developers use Google services to ease their work, if you know what I mean. So
I'll tell you by experience,
Yes.
because we recently finished in Greece the full fiscalization of the A920, and we put on the terminal also an application for a waiter to pick up orders at the table and connect to the server in the kitchen and the monitors that tell the chef what to cook and everything, which was a ready Android application that somebody else had developed in the past, yeah? So I understand what you say, but for an Android developer who has already made an application, to, let's say, refresh his application using Paydroid to make it built in a structure that is convenient for deployment on the terminal, it's not a big deal, yeah? And this is putting the application in the vetting process, let's say, of packs, so we then can check the security and the interference with other applications. So it's not like you can take your existing Android application of something else and just plug it on an Android terminal. But the fact that you have it ready means the time to bring it on an Android terminal might be 10 days, while building it from scratch could be a couple of months.
yeah, understood.
I mean, obviously, when I said that there's many Android applications out there that could be reused on our payment devices, I'm not saying you just take the code from that and just drop it on an A920 and then sell that, okay? Almost always, there's some kind of integration that needs to take place between the payment application on the device and this vertical application, an ECR application. There's a minimum amount of work in that respect. And if there's any services, for example, using Google Mobile Service and so on, that application is using which are not available on the A920, then they need to be adapted to the equivalent service that is available on Paydroid, for example, okay? But we're not saying that it's immediate, but obviously the time and the effort required to do that work is, it's much faster than if you're developing some application, say, on Prolin, for example, from scratch to try to do the same.
But Mark, given the opportunity of this question, I think that around the Android topic, PAX should put together some official guidelines and statements as a manufacturer, as the leading manufacturer of Android devices, around some very key topics like why not Google Play, okay? Why not Android version updating on the terminal? Because these are common questions, and not all of us are equipped to answer them properly. So sometimes this is taken by the market as a weakness. Okay, I asked why they cannot upgrade the Android version, and I didn't get a clear answer. There is a clear answer, has to do with PCI, has to do with a lot of things, but PAX has to put that in a structured way, in official statements, okay, which we can share with customers, which explain why this is not possible, why we don't connect to Google Play, why we don't field update the Android version. This is something you have to do.
Yeah, speaking of that, maybe I'd like to share something else beside the payment PCI DSS of the PCI standards. The other part of the concern of the world today is all about your personal data. Your personal data that can be leaked easily outside of the markets. I mean, especially, let's say, like they say that about whether you putting all the Google's Play that can be put into a terminal. Not really. I think that the users of the Google Play is actually for those end users who try to use whatever application they want to use. But wherever this terminal is mostly is basically for the business merchant to suit the application is suit to the business merchant. Where sometimes when come into this personal data, I think from the other angle that as from the very initiative, we like to very work in the very front end to ensure that the data that we process, we have the mechanisms to encrypt it with the payment device itself. They already have this mechanism, and we're utilizing on this the features of the encryptions module that to send all this data into our servers and securely process these sensitive data. I think that is another part of soon or later, everyone will be looking at the personal data's protections. Yeah.
Just changing topic, how do we compete against Aevi, Point, Clover?
So yesterday I was making the point that, and actually Panos was saying that as well, that in the past our customers relied on us to provide them the hardware, and in general relied on us as well to provide the software, okay? And the payment terminal was sold as a single block, you know, payment application, and very often it was just seen as a mono-function device which just does the payment, and that was very straightforward. But what happens with Android is that suddenly the link between the hardware and the software gets broken, and you could conceivably buy hardware from one customer and get your application from somebody else, or get multiple applications, and all it means is that you're suddenly in an environment where people are buying software separately from the hardware, and people are moving into that space to position themselves as software providers for the payment industry, and they're going to our customers and saying, we can be hardware independent, or you can buy the hardware from anyone, but you have to come to us, we'll give you that functionality, that software. And there's a lot of value associated with that, okay? And so that's what Aevi is doing. They're positioning themselves just as a company to provide that application and all that management around the applications. People like Clover and Point, they are linked to hardware, but they're stressing the application side a lot more as well. So I think as we move forward, we as well will need to have more messaging and more of a value proposition around the application side, as well as having obviously the focus on the hardware as well. So that's going to be a continuing effort, I think. But definitely today, if you look at the messaging that we have, it's still extremely hardware focused. The software is almost seen as a tool to sell the hardware, and that's understandable because that's kind of where we're coming from. But I think we're moving towards an environment where the applications and that kind of side is going to become more and more important. So perhaps on the marketing side, we should start communicating a little bit more on those aspects too.
It very much depends on which market you are in. What I mean, In my markets, we usually, like I said earlier, we sell to banks and PSPs. So the break between the hardware and software is not that clear, because the merchant in Greece who's going to take a terminal from Viva is relying on Viva for the payment software, for the payment services, for the acquiring, for everything. So it's not like the merchant can decide, I go sign up with somebody else, get my software elsewhere. Doesn't work this way. And the payment providers and the banks who buy from us, they still buy terminal, payment software, plus the platform for managing the terminals. So if you have this in place, then it's very difficult for AEVI or somebody else to come in and take that away. Okay? In markets, however, which are more open and you also sell directly to merchants or to big merchants groups, the risk of having somebody else come to steal away the software business is important. In my mind, the way to address that, on top of what Connor said, is that as the evolution of Paxtor continues, Paxtor should become a framework. I mean, in my mind, it should become like a very sophisticated terminal and platform management system, okay? And then the specific functions would be modules, and the application marketplace would be just one of those modules. Because the other part, the framework, what the customers understand as the terminal management system, they expect to receive that from the terminal provider. So it should be there. And if you have it there, then you control everything, okay?
What we see when we look, for example, to AEVI is that you really have a lot of applications, but when you look to your specific markets, then you will see that most of these applications don't fit to your local country needs, because a lot of those business applications are always needing, you can say, a customization for the market. So, for example, if I have bookkeeping applications, they are different for US or for Australia or for Europe, and even in Europe for the different countries. And I see there a lot of really opportunities for us to build also a partner and developer network, which is really focusing then on the local market needs. And this is also what I see as a very important subject for us together. At the end, it's not the marketplace. The marketplace is a system, you can say, to manage applications. But you really need to build up also a partner and a developer network to bring apps to customize it for your market. And if it's only customization in language, you can say, or in legacy, in tax issues. There we see really that there is a lot still open in these areas, and that AEVI also doesn't have it for our markets. And if we are working here close together, I think we also can build a community. On the one side, also a community where we discussed already that maybe also our payment applications have one API, you can say, to really start payment, a refund and things like that, because then the ecosystem of a PAX payment application is very useful for a developer, because regardless in which country he's using the partner, he can be sure that he has not to adopt again his payment interface, you know. So I think on that side, we have to work together to build a PAX community and a PAX API, which can be used maybe worldwide even.
Should PAX be offering an application development service for Android, apart from payment, do you think?
Mark, I will answer that, although I'm not a developer, yeah. You have been in this industry for a long time. Whenever the terminal manufacturer tried to provide direct development services, this failed with a big noise, okay? So it failed for a very simple reason. First, because every small country, every big country, every specific market has very different set of requirements, yeah? So the manpower that you need as PAX, if you want to offer direct software development services, would be huge. And you don't know, I mean, you have to have, it's chicken and egg again. You have to have a lot of people to promise that, but you don't know how many people are going to come to you and pay you money to do that. Second thing is that we still sell most of the terminals bundled together with the payment software, okay? So I don't think this is a very good idea, okay? I think, in fact, and you know this from personal discussions, that the fact that PAX is the only big player in the terminal business who says, my job is to make great hardware, this is a very big plus for PAX, compared to other vendors who got a little bit confused. I want to be an aggregator, I want to be a processor, I want to be a little bit of value-added provider, and all of these things. So I don't think this is a good idea, honestly.
And I also want to go back to what Gunther said. I agree with you 100% on building a community. At the moment, I saw some presentation that said we have something about 700 apps in App Store or in the Pack Store somewhere. But the only thing I see, yeah, something like that, yeah. And I'm pretty sure that in this network that we will find a lot of business apps that we could reuse in different markets. So we need to open up and share all these things that's going on in different markets.
Maybe one last point. I think that anyway we discussed too much also about payment on these devices. From my feeling, we maybe will see over the next 3-5 years that maybe 90% of the apps has nothing to do with payment. So this means they are really only managing, for example, the bank account of your merchant. They are managing maybe the time management for your employees. So very simple apps, you can say, to get more in the merchant's ecosystem of managing his stores instead of looking to payment. Payment at the end is only one component of that.
Mohammed, yeah.
Yes. Regarding the point that Gunther mentioning, I want to share with you one experience for promoting Android terminal, and that's the integration of cloud technology by smart Android terminal. I mean, which problem we are going to solve. For small retailer, majority of them, they don't have any ECR because it's expensive for them. And we found that by integrating of Android terminal and a business cloud, we can give them a cheap ECR. For example, even by A80, recently we found by integrating a barcode reader even to the countertop POS, we can make such a system which I think could work. But my question is that a challenge that we are facing, I'm talking about both A and E products here, ECRs. The size of the merchant, do you have any experience regarding the size of the merchant? Because we found that the small retailer, it's easy to penetrate. But medium and big merchants, they have a sophisticated system themselves already. They have a system. And it's difficult to find a way or, to convince them to migrate. Do you have any experience on these kind of merchants, medium and large scale merchants?
Every market is different, I think, in the way the retail sector is addressed, okay, by different companies. I've seen in some markets that the kind of mid-tier retail is often addressed, for example, by integrators, okay? People who are selling the EPOS systems, and sometimes the payment is almost like a peripheral on the EPOS system. And those kind of retail companies who are bundling, you know, the POS machine with the software and selling that to the merchant, they, with our Android devices, those companies, those integration companies, retail integrators, they become a possible customer for us, okay? And they would very often become the customer for PAX. They would buy the devices and they will bundle that with their software, and they sell that on to these larger retailers, okay? But that really is very market specific. It depends on.
This is also the experience from our markets. First of all, we as an organization, transaction systems, and I guess many of the resellers here, we don't have the amount of people who can go door to door and sell to every individual merchant. So what we have been trying to do is to go to to companies who are already selling cash registers systems to any local market. They have their own resellers in every country who go door to door. And you just say, okay, here's a device that you can sell instead of a classic ECR. And by the way, the payment is embedded. We embed it together with one of our acquirers, okay, who already have our products. So you can go with your channel and sell it like an advanced hardware which has integrated payment. Because the effort for us, who are not, I mean, at least my company, we haven't been doing ECR systems in the past. The effort and the manpower to go directly to find the small and medium and big merchant and sell to them directly, I don't think it would ever make sense.
I understand this one and I agree with you, but you know what is the challenge here is that this is not a hardware market, this is a software market. And the challenge by these retail software providers, for example, is that the majority of them at these days, they are based on Windows. And they have too much resistance, you know. Either you shall wait for them to convince them to come to Android, or you shall find a kind of partnership idea with them to develop the Android platform.
Yeah, kind of like Panos was saying that for Android terminals in the banking space, it was like the innovators, okay? Like Viva Wallet, who were the company who were the first to say, oh, we're going to go with this because we want something new. What I've seen just in my limited experience is that it is often the innovators in the retail space, okay, who are already going with Android. They're the ones who are most open to this kind of approach. The people who are selling like the Windows systems, they're very much against Android in general because the price point is much lower for Android, okay? And they're used to making, the traditional POS vendors are usually making quite nice money selling their systems, okay? And they have no interest whatsoever in allowing Android in. Just like in the POS terminal industry, Verifone and Ingenico had no interest in Android coming along either because it's opening things up and making the price come down as well. So maybe one idea is to target some of those more innovative integrators if they're in your market. They probably are there, but they have a lower market share than some of the big guys probably, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, Connor, on that. And I think also that you have to think about, when you think about the retail segment, you have the entry level who have certain needs, and they are very price sensitive, and you have the ones on the middle size, and you have the high-end retailers. And they all have different needs. And as Connor would say, I think it's important to remember that you have to align yourself with different POS providers who are targeting these different segments. So in your portfolio in-house, you need to have different solution for different segments.
Any questions from the audience before we break for lunch? Thank you, gentlemen. We'll convene back here at, what time, Germany?